Hello, everybody. A very good evening to all of you. This is Koral Dasgupta, author and entrepreneur. I'm sitting with Nandini Sengupta, Saiswaroopa, Iyer, and Harini Srinivasan, all of whom are dear friends. And of course, they have created a body of work when it comes to Indian history and Indian mythology. So before I begin the session, let me remind the audience that registrations are open for the writing program season 5 in association with Rupa Publishers. So you must register before 15th February in order to participate. Going to start the session now. A very warm welcome to Harini, Nandini, and Sai. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Uh, Harini, Nandini, and Sai, we are all authors primarily. That is our primary identity, and we had been working on Indian history and mythology and/or mythology in our respective capacities. Other than that, Nandini and Harini are content writers. Nandini is a journalist. I and Sai do everything possible to read, research, write, understand, and put it up on social media. You can check us up, all of us, on social media. We are interesting. Going to start the session now. I would begin with a very simple question, which is not mine, but has come from the audience. The moment we had put up this particular uh, this particular session information, and the question is, what do you mean by feminist men? So, panelists, it's open to you. First, Nandini, then Sai Swarupa, then Harini Srinivasan, if we can introduce, or if you could give a clarity on what do we mean by feminist men, and I will come at the end. Nandini, please go ahead.
Thank you
Nandini?
so much, Koral. This is a lovely opportunity, and it is a lovely opportunity because I get to chat with my dear friends and fellow authors. And we are a pack of power girls who talk about India's glorious history and some of the fascinating characters from our past. So I really loved this particular session and its topic because it is something that's very close to my heart. And when obviously one disclaimer straight up, because it is important to say so. When we take a concept like feminism and we use it to talk about an era which is way into our past, we have to understand that feminism as we know it today cannot be a concept that our past would understand necessarily, because it was completely alien to them. So if you think feminism is all about bra burning and all of that, all the associated militancy that comes with it, then no, the characters that I'm going to talk about probably wouldn't even know what feminism is if it came and bit them on the nose. But if feminism is all about giving a choice, giving empowerment, giving the women around you the power to control their destinies, then some of the men that I'm going to hopefully talk about in this session were exemplars of feminism. Coral, I would come back to you and leave the question to you whether you would want me to talk about some of those characters or whether some of the other panelists would first talk about what feminism means to them.
Yeah, I think let us go ahead with this question first. So, Sai, it's over to you. You are muted.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Coral. And Nandini, that was an awesome way of putting down what feminism meant to India's past and, what it would not mean. So, yes, I totally agree with Nandini and would like to re emphasize that. We need to recontextualize the meaning of feminism, at least for this discussion. It's not about, again, those extreme man hating or extremely anguished or angry, reactionary expressions that we see, fortunately or unfortunately. And yeah, the men from India's past. I believe were feminists, and yes, I'd love to talk about those examples. But yes, I think for now, I would like to quote Shakuntala from Mahabharata, who says, "Ardha bharya manushyasya bharya sreshtatama sakha, bharya moolam trivargasya bharya mitram arishyataam." I guess I quoted this in the last, panel discussion that we had also, or somewhere. But I keep quoting this everywhere because people don't know what was the value and the parity that existed between man and women. So, men and women. So, everything in ancient India was based on Purusharth. So, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. And the roles of men and women were defined based on their Swabhava. The Swabhava used to decide the Swadharma, and the aim was to maintain a balance between these purusharthas. So Shakuntala rightly says ki, wife is half of her husband, and wife is his best friend. So if a man has some other best friend than his wife, something is terribly wrong. And she invests in the three purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, and she becomes a natural partner in moksha. So that is the parity that existed, and we keep seeing examples of many strong women, unapologetically unique women, and those were the products of the ecosystem that existed then, and that included many real feminist men.
Lovely. Sorry. Harini, please offer
Thank,
your thoughts on
thank
this.
you, Coral. I mean, Nandini and Saiswaroopa have summed it up very beautifully. The thing is, see, feminism as we know it is a very modern concept. It's not really. It's a Western concept,
Yeah.
and it's a very complex notion. You cannot, and it has differences in its meaning when you and it has differences when you look at when it comes to nationalities, cultures, identities, even social classes. So what feminism is for a particular class or a culture cannot be transposed to another one. And for us now, when we look at it, we need to view those men or women from the society that they come from. So we are looking at it with a particular lens, which exactly is like, very far away from the time that we are looking at. And Indian society, if you really look at Indian history, as Sai was just mentioning, see, the whole ecosystem was very different, right? So women did have a lot more privileges and rights that Western women did not have for a very long time. So you can't really take that and put it out there. So when you look at Indian history, there are so many men who are very feminist, because what is feminism? At least according to me, it's about equality, it's about parity, men and women having the same rights. And if you look at it that way, lots of examples of feminist men in the in history, where and women have been very empowered. When empowered, I don't really mean development as such. It's more about the choice to do what they want to do and lead their lives the way they want to, and overcome whatever challenges life throws in their way. So
Harini, you have put it very well in context. And just like Nandini and Sai has also done, uh, in the past, I had been researching and trying to understand the works on India that has been done by scholars who are not necessarily from India or Indian. And one common trace that I have found without, and I'm not trying to be, critical of their work, but what I have figured is that the the Indian history has been looked at from a very foreign lens without trying to understand the culture of this land and uh, where this particular way of thinking, the spirituality, the gender norms, everything has been judged. I mean, I am sitting somewhere else and looking at India and trying to understand India without knowing India might actually come out with a very biased report. So you are very right in pointing out that feminism is a very Western concept which may not apply exactly in the Indian subtexts. And having said that, as you all have said, I understand that within that particular social system, within those days, if there were men who didn't feel intimidated when a woman exercised her choice and took herself forward in the way she wanted to, probably I would call that man far more evolved than his times. Uh, Also, one of the things that comes to my mind is uh, we often use the term dharma, and dharma stands for righteousness, and that righteousness has a lot to do with different kinds of politics: gender politics, animal politics, national politics, all kinds of politics. And dharma does believe that everybody has equal rights, and which doesn't apply only to women. And that is the largeness of the Indian, ecosystem, that it talks about equality of every kind of existential, the equal existential rights, be it animals, be it humans, be it whoever. So, taking on from there, I come to the most fundamental question of this evening, which is uh, I would like to invite the panelists to name the feminist man or men who they want to bring to this discussion, and also offer us that why they named this particular character or characters, uh, and why would they think that these were the more evolved characters when it comes to women's emancipation in the past. Nandini?
Thank you, Koral. So I'm super, super thrilled because this gives me the chance to talk uh, about three men who have been my ideals for masculinity. Um, and in many ways they were, because these men lived 1600 years ago. And yet, if you look at the way they looked at their world, their world view, if it were, if you look at that, you will see how utterly modern they were. And yes, unsurprisingly, I'm talking about my favorite Gupta emperors. So I'm going to talk because these are men who I have lived with. I've written a trilogy about them, and the more we talk about them, the more people will understand that nowadays youngsters tend to think of our ancient past as a kind of Game of Thrones kind of nasty, brutish, bloody, but actually it wasn't so. And in a just a bit over the next couple of minutes, I'll just give a glimpse of why it wasn't so. So let's start with the founder of the dynasty, Chandragupta the First. Now, Chandragupta the First was a very unusual ruler because he had a small, he was a powerful upcoming chieftain, and he had a small kingdom, but he sort of catapulted himself to what is known as a Maharaja Adhiraja, which is like a bigger king, thanks to his wife. And who was his wife? His wife was the Lichavi princess Kumaradevi. So as a result, you will find that this gentleman, when he strikes gold coins, he strikes gold coins with his wife standing next to him. And we are talking about 4th century CE. You show me one instance anywhere in the world where a king actually shares his coin with his wife in 4th century CE, and there are tons of gold coins belonging to Chandragupta the First, where he and Kumara Devi are standing side by side.
Hmm.
So he has no problems whatsoever accepting the fact that his position as Maharaja Adhiraja owes a lot to the strength and power of his wife's family. Empowered man. Okay. Now let us see what happens to his son, who's my favorite emperor. This gentleman's name is Samudragupta. Okay. So Samudragupta, when he comes to the throne, very interestingly, he calls himself not Chandragupta Putra, but Lichavi Dohitra. And again, I'm not dreaming all this up. This is all history. It is part of the numismatic history of Gupta dynasty. It is part of the inscriptional history of Gupta dynasty. It is documented history. So he calls himself Lichavi Dohitra, which means that he is harking back to his mother's lineage rather than his father's lineage. Hello? How many of our men today do that? Right? Now let us see what he does when he goes and mints coins. His queen's name is Datta Devi. And once again, like his father, he has gold coins minted with both his likeness on the front and his wife's likeness on the obverse. Very interesting. And you have to also understand that the Gupta monarchs were devout Bhagavatas. They were Vishnu worshippers. That is the reason why you will find again and again, particularly in central India, several Varaha Murtis. The Udayagiri cave Murti is the most well known, but all over central India you will find this absolutely imposing, majestic Varaha Murtis going back to the Gupta era, because that was the time when the iconography of Vishnu worship became really, really popular and was patronized by these kings. Now, Vishnu and Lakshmi, therefore, constantly pop up in all their coins again and again, including that of Skandagupta, who's the last of the great Gupta monarchs. Of course, they continued for another 100 years after him. But Skandagupta, according to legend, never married. But even his coins have picture of Lakshmi, right? So the Gupta monarchs were very comfortable sharing their sacred space with Vishnu Lakshmi. And this iconography also manifested itself in their coins. Now let us come to Chandragupta Vikramaditya. Chandragupta Vikramaditya was one of the obviously the greatest monarchs in ancient India. He's so well known that you have legend and stories about him. What is less known is that Chandragupta Vikramaditya's daughter, called Prabhavati Devi, by her own right, was a very, very powerful queen of the Deccan. She was married into the Vakataka dynasty of Western Deccan. All right. And she, for a long, long time, she was one of the ancient, well known ancient rulers who actually ruled as regent because her husband died very early. And, her son was a minor. She had two sons. One son died, the other one survived. Son was a minor. So she had a nearly decade and a half, nearly 2 decade long rule as regent. And if we have to look at India's well known, powerful, efficient queens, she's one of them. But that's not why we are talking about her here. She is referenced in a very famous inscription called the Pune copper plate inscription. All right. If you look at the Pune copper plate inscription, it is very interesting because she is referring to her Gotra. All right. Now, we all know that when Hindu women marry, their Gotra changes, right? From their father's Gotra to their husband's Gotra. But guess what Prabhavati Devi does? She is referencing her Gotra as Dharana Gotra, which is her father's Gotra. Mind you, she by this time is a widow and the queen of the Vakatakas. But she is referencing her father's Gotra, showing that, even 1600 years ago, she had the gumption and the strength to do pretty much what she thought was important to her. And her lineage was important to her as a woman, as a queen, as a daughter. So the family that allowed her to do this was an exceptional family. The kings who ruled in that dynasty were exceptional rulers because again and again and again we see them establishing an ecosystem, which is what Sai was talking about, the ecosystem. That ecosystem was there to allow women to have agency. And here I'm going to just take 2 minutes more. If you look at the women in Kalidasa's poetry that Harini is going to talk about in greater detail, but the women in Kalidasa's poetry, you have to understand, are so incredibly empowered because they inhabit that same ecosystem. which was established and which flourished under these Gupta rulers. So, under these 4 5 Gupta rulers who allowed this ecosystem to build up and who allowed that creativity and that liberal and empowered lifestyle and worldview to flourish. So that's the reason why my choice of a feminist man, I mean, I can take my pick from any of these men, but I think I am going to go with Lichavi Dohitra Samudragupta. Back to you, Coral.
Wonderful, Nandini. That's really, really interesting and insightful, just mind blowing. Since I think I and Sai, we will both talk mythology. Harini, why don't you continue from where Nandini left?
Yeah, thank you, Koral. Actually, when you first, spoke to us about this particular topic, my pick would have been Chandragupta Vikramaditya, because my book also belongs to the Gupta dynasty, and I know that dynasty much more than any other period in ancient India. But Nandini picked the dynasty, so I'm not going to talk much about Chandragupta. My picks would be Kalidasa, as she just mentioned. That's because, Kalidasa, while everybody knows him to be such a great play, perhaps the greatest playwright of ancient India, not many people know that he was actually the tutor to Prabhavati Gupta's sons. So Meghadutam was actually composed at Ramtek near Nandivardhana, the kingdom of Prabhavati Gupta. And if you look at Kalidasa's life, I mean, whatever little is known about it, and Nandini has written a wonderful children's book on it as well. If you realize that it has been the way he has kind of worked, like Vidyottama, his wife, who basically kind of, insulted him and propelled him to become what he did. So that just shows that here was this daughter, of a king, Vidyottama, who could do what she wanted to. She could just get rid of this dumb fellow, mute fellow, and that propelled him to become the great playwright that he was. So Kalida, and of course, I will talk more in detail about how the women in his, plays, Shakuntala, maybe, or Urvashi, or even Sita, they're all very empowered. And when we mean what we mean by empowered is they had the choice to do what they want to, and lead their lives no matter what the circumstances were. And within the fairly patriarchal society, and when I say patriarchal society, I'm looking at it from my lens, of what I view as a patriarchal society. Because Shakuntala, she led her life with so much dignity. She did what she wanted to, despite the fact that Dushyant, forgot all about her. You know that story, right? Like, so in that, the way she led her life and did what she wanted to, and managed to kind of overcome all the struggles that she went through with such respect and self-respect, I think is amazing. And Kalidasa has portrayed these women beautifully, and all these women are very strong characters. Be it Urvashi was extremely well educated, cultured. Of course, there was a curse that made her get come to earth, but she was. But again, as I said, that this is the way, the way he has portrayed these women makes me feel that he was probably a feminist man, if you can say. But besides Kalidasa, another person, I mean, some other men that I would like to name are the Chola Kings. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on the dynasty, but whatever I've read about it, the position, the status of women in that particular dynasty was very, very good, and that probably made these men feminist rulers. Like, I don't know if many people know this, but the Chola Kings had warriors where they were female soldiers who were brave and who were trained to kind of defend the king. His bodyguards were actually were women. And besides that, in the Chola kingdom, if you read, I mean, all those inscriptions, there were a lot of women who made those donations, paid taxes, you know on all the temple, this thing that just shows that these women were independent. They had the freedom to use their money the way they
Hmm.
wanted to. That's basically economic independence.
Yes.
And another person that I would like to talk about is Varahimira. Varahimira is this great polymath from the Gupta period itself. He was an astrologer, an astronomer. Not many people know this, but in his Brihat Samhita, there's an entire section where he's written in praise of women. And the way he's extolled women is not necessarily for their beauty or their physical aspects, but for the virtues that, that they bring along. In fact, there is, I think, one sentence, and I read a particular translation. I haven't read it in the Sanskrit. I mean, I don't know that much Sanskrit actually, but what I remember is that he actually calls women superior to men, and he defends there's this entire section on the praise of women, which makes me believe then he is definitely a feminist man. And I think that comes from the ecosystem, from the kind of society that he lived in, where women had those equal rights. So it didn't really seem out of the blue. I mean, we are marveling at him now sitting here in 2022, but for them, I think it was just the way it was. So these were the few people that I would like to talk about.
Thank you,
Uh,
Harini. Again, fabulous inputs you have put. I can see questions coming in. There's one question. Request to the audience, please. You can put in your questions in the comment section, and we will take them up at the end of the session once we are done with the discussion. Sai, please come ahead with yours. Let's enter mythology and go back
Yes,
to you.
but I mean, great extolling by Nandini and Harini. I'm so much enthused to read more about the Gupta period, and interesting that you brought up Kalidasa, Harini, because when his wife, yes, wife jeered at him, calling him, a fool or something like that, and he goes to pray to goddess Shamala, and goddess Shamala gives him that knowledge, and he composes this Shamala Dandakam, and we are currently passing through a phase that is a Navaratri that is dedicated to goddess Shamala. So she's the warrior form of goddess Saraswati. So I mean, I just wanted to add that. And yes, not just Kalidasa. I would say every. This is not my quote, but scholar Gariki Patidar Simharao, he was. He was awarded Padma Shri recently by the government. He's a great Telugu scholar, and in one of his pravachanas, I heard him say, "Kavi Hridayam is Stri Hridayam," and whoever cannot understand the heart of a woman, he cannot be a poet whose works would stand the test of time. So that is so I think every Indian poet whose works have really stood the test of time had a feminist within him. The biggest example being Vedavyasa. uh, we can see how his women, each of his women, be it Savitri, Shakuntala, Vidula, and Madhavi. I mean, I'm not even coming to Kunti, Draupadi, Gandhari, but even the minor women, Shandili. So I mean, I think once we start exploring his Mahabharata and even his Veda, the Vedic women, there's a lot of pedestal given to the feminine. And yes, there are many men, but I would choose for today. I would choose Lord Krishna, my favorite, as the probably the best feminist man who existed. Of course, he's an avatar Purusha, so it's not fair to compare him with other men. But I think there is a lot to learn from Krishna's life as to how to exactly treat women. And do I have the time to
Yes,
elaborate? Or,
Sai, please go ahead.
yeah. So will come from right from the childhood of Krishna, right? And so the first incident that really struck me was the incident of Govardhana. Here he actually, it's feminine. It's not just about women, but it's about acknowledging the femininity of the universe and opting for worshipping nature, right? Being that hill, or Govardhan puja, or the whole ritual of opting for nature worship itself suggests that strong feminine respect that he had. And he's not anti yajna. We can see him championing Rajasuya and his own Krishna's daily routine is documented in detail by Vedavyasa in Bhagavatam. In that, he is a performer of yajnas also. So it's not like he was an anti-yajna or anti-Indra or nothing like that. But for that ecosystem of Gokula, Vrindavana that was existing, he was emphasizing on nature worship, and nature worship has strong feminine characteristic to it. Bhumi, or let it bhumi, or forest, or anything, right? So the prakriti itself is woman. Like purusha can be the masculine form of divinity, but prakriti is the feminine form of divinity. So that is a great example of how he balanced between both the aspects. And then comes the Rasalila, right? I know it's totally misunderstood by people who don't
Yes.
read enough into the don't read sufficiently into the episode, because once he starts playing flute and the gopikas come, and the discussion between them was is something really really elevating, right? And first Krishna actually tries to tell them he tries to tell them to go back and uh, say, when you girls might get into trouble with your families and in-laws, and so why you behind me? And then the explanation given by gopikas is so elevating about the transient nature of the body and what they are actually aiming when they are desiring Krishna. It goes beyond the body level. So that is one another aspect. Every man and woman, the outlook of life was not just physiological. So it existed in various planes at that time. And when we interpret in the modern times, when we interpret it and reduce it to physiological nature, we lose a lot of depth of the Puran, the text, actually the knowledge system, the whole knowledge system. So he actually, and then he respects that argument put forth by gopikas and gives himself to them, right? And I cannot think of a greater example of respecting feminine wish, where the world order, seeming apparent world order is against it, but he took care to respect their wishes as well as protect them from the repercussions of that, right? That's one really great elevating example, spiritually elevating example. And we'll come to the macro political example later. Do I have time, or
Sai, you can continue. I mean,
yes?
I will not restrict this to the
Okay.
minutes because this discussion is more important than the minutes that we cover.
Yes. So now comes the episode of Narakasura Vadha, where Narakasura is actually a Shakti worshipper himself, gone astray, and he ends up imprisoning these 16,000 women, against their will. And once Krishna kills Narakasura, Krishna and Satyabhama, both of them, they come and kill Narakasura. In South, we believe that Satyabhama killed Narakasura. And then there's also a version where Satyabhama fought with Narakasura, and at last Krishna revived, and he killed Narakasura with his this thing. And the Assamese legends believe that the mother goddess killed Narakasura. So, anyways, my book Abhaya is launching in a couple of days, and that tries to reconcile all these views about the whole episode. But here there was a dilemma that Krishna faced, because all these 16,000 women, after they were rescued, they had nowhere to go. So basically, God knows how when they were kidnapped, how long they were in captivity, what all ordeals they went through. Nothing is documented, and where all they came from. Can they go back? And none of the women were ready to go back. That itself tells about how what they would have faced in their captivity. And trying to rehabilitate them, trying to and acknowledging that the world needs them back, and they deserve that life of dignity. And then taking this bold step of marrying all of them, right? Of course, physically the number 16,000 seems really, really daunting to a person, trying to interpret that from 21st century. But set the number aside, but we can just imagine what would have been Krishna's thought process in doing that. It's not a patronizing step, because when you give a woman the status of your wife, there are a lot of rights about your family, about your household, about your future, a lot of rights that you share with her, right? So marrying those women, and again, like giving them children, I mean, having unions with them, and treating them at par with his 8 other wives, right? That is something that I keep reading, and feel it so hard to digest, that someone can have so much of sensitivity, right? Of course, he's again, I'll come back and settle down that he's an avatara, but so much of that sensitivity, as well as action oriented decision, right? So that the world does not slip into that disorder. Otherwise it would have been a very there are people who win over Rakshasas. There were strong warriors, all over the land. There were very, very strong warriors, but I don't think anybody put through this kind of sensitivity over their victories, after their victories.
True. Thank you, Sai. I mean, I was expecting you to come out with Krishna because your Rukmini had just come out. So I was waiting to hear from you on Krishna. And I can never be satiated hearing Krishna. No one can be. I would like to draw attention of all three of you and the audience here towards two characters. One is, and as I said, for me, feminism of that era, I try to see simply from that perspective that who are the men who are not intimidated when the women call the shots. And one of the person that I see here is Pandu. Uh, and why of it I will get later, but what I see is when a person like, and this particular story has certain interpretations into it, certain common sense into it as I talk, that when Kunti said to Pandu that his incapability to produce children would not mean that they cannot have children, she has the boon which can give her children. It is impossible for a man to not ask, where did she get it from? Number one. Number two, how will it happen? How will the children come? And number three, the most important question, did you have a child already? It's common sense. It's natural for anybody to ask when they know about this kind of a boon, which means that Pandu knew each and every secret of Kunti, which we say that Kunti's secret, which are the big women's, I mean, for which even Kunti was cursed by her son, but Kunti had come out open with her husband. And the second, I mean, Pandu's instance, I really find very fascinating, and when I had this kind of an insight, I went behind to check why Pandu is like who he is, and I found a gold mine out there, which I will disclose in due time. But another person I would like to draw attention is Shantanu, who married, I mean, we know that he was married to Ganga and Satyavati, and both times he married with certain terms of the wedding. Maybe in today's language we call it a prenup, which the women had put forward. And when the first was violated, Ganga walked out of the marriage, and Satyavati married only on those terms. And Shantanu never said that I will not listen, or he didn't violate. As a man, he didn't say that I have a problem with you or you cannot do this. He had a problem with Satyavatis because he felt he was being unjust to his son Devavrat. But then he never told Satyavati that you cannot have this kind of a demand. He just cocooned within himself, which Devavrata came to know, and we know what happened in history. Now, I will bring you to the next question, which uh, you know, I mean, if we can just draw a brief background to the characters we have just introduced, and tell the audience that what made them who they were, and which experience influenced their personalities, if we have not covered that already, that what made them so different from the rest of the people in their era. So we go back to Nandini.
Thank you. This was such an interesting talk. I mean, thank you, Sai. Thank you, Harini. Thank you, Koral. Beautiful. And I want to take a cue from what Sai was talking about. About this, mm, the wish, respecting the wish of the 16,000 gopinis. Well, there used to be a custom, a festival. Holi is, of course, its modern version, but in its ancient version, the Vasant festival actually involved the women of the land, the women of the city, telling the king if they desired him or not. And if they did desire him, then he was duty bound to respect that their desire. It's as simple as that. That I am your king, so in that respect, I have to give you what your heart's desire is, and on this particular day, your romantic desires, your desires of love, as opposed to desires of say protection or desires of say some other kind. In this case, your desire is of love, and if you desire that of me, I am duty bound to uh, give that, to respect that. So I don't know whether this tradition has something to do with the Krishna Ras Leela, or with the 16,000 gopinis. They could be, because today's Holi, as we know, has a very strong integration with Krishna worship and the Krishna story. So I am not sure. I'm not qualified to draw those parallels. I simply don't know enough. Uh, I'm a journalist. I'm not a historian. I just read history for fun. But what I'm saying is that there could be a very strong correlation, and that our ancient tradition actually drew from Krishna and from the Krishna story to build this very beautiful and very empowering festival of allowing and respecting a woman's desires. But at this point, I also want to talk a little bit, since we are talking about desires, I do want to talk about the Kama Sutra a little bit. Because here again, you have to see that this is an ecosystem that allowed, the Gupta era is an ecosystem that allowed that book to be written. But we must also not forget that the Gupta era was also the time when much of our sacred texts were also codified. So they were obviously much older, but that was Shruti, and then they were codified. But the codification was, most of it was done during the Gupta era. A lot of the Puranas, for instance, were codified during the Gupta era. So you have, therefore, an entire cultural ecosystem which allows, first of all, uh, a writer to talk about desire the way that the Kama Sutra does, and different types of desire. And if you read the book, I have read the book, and you will find that it is in some places it is a very scientific treatise. They are trying to look at it as science, which it also is, as we now know. People go for therapy and all the there are doctors who handle issues, physical issues that have to do with love and with sex. But now, what I'm trying to say here is that imagine a society, all right, which on the one hand, you have the absolutely what Sri Aurobindo calls the high noon of Indian civilization. Sure, these are Sri Aurobindo's words. The high noon of India's civilization, manifest themselves in Kalidasa's poetry. So you have literature which is amazingly rarefied, it is amazingly enlightened. So you have that. Then you have the Kama Sutra, which is talking about the science of desire. And the ecosystem is fine with him talking about that. The ecosystem is also trying to codify sacred texts, right? And so therefore you have therefore a society which is unbelievably confident in what it stands for and the traditions that it represents. And I think that is my most significant takeaway from the Gupta era, that those were people who were so supremely confident of where they came from. They were so rooted. And again, like I said, I mean, the Gupta rulers, if you look at it, much of it is connected with with Vishnu worship. Vishnu Lakshmi worship. They used to call themselves, the Gupta kings used to call themselves Param Bhattaraka, you know. So Maharaja, Adhiraja, Param Bhattaraka. So therefore, they would very clearly mention that they are devotees of Chakrapani Vishnu in their title, you know. So what I'm trying to say here is that in terms of their worldview, it was also very rooted in a sacred tradition. But that sacred tradition was egalitarian enough, was cosmopolitan enough, was liberal enough, was fluid enough to allow all sorts of different, literary, scientific, and other thoughts to exist and flower. And I think that ecosystem is something, is what makes the Gupta era, the golden age of our history. The Ale Basham calls it the wonder that was India. The wonder that was India is actually Gupta era, because that's when it started to flower. And of course, Harini mentioned the Cholas. That the Cholas came some 500-600 years later, and of course, the what started then gets its fruition, gets its manifests itself in all its colors and in all its various hues and nuances in the Chola era. But the start began with these wonderful gentlemen of the Gupta dynasty.
Lovely. Harini, would you like to throw light on the background? Is there any information available from your perspective?
From the Chola Kings, not really. I mean, individual lives, not really. But as Nandini put it, the entire ecosystem had come to fruition in this particular era. Like you had women in all spheres. I mean, you had these temple ladies, women dedicated to the temple who were
Mm,
called Devar Adiyar. I think
mm.
I mean, I'm not very sure about exactly. Probably this
The
was the
term.
beginning of the Devadasis whom we know now. But at that point in time, these women were not necessarily just dancers in the temple, but they were women who would perform other duties like, holding the lamps, then basically cooking in the kitchen, for the prasadam, the ritual, for the deities, and as well for distribution for the annadanam in that place. Then there would be women who would have these tasks of basically, cleaning up the entire temple premises with cow dung. So all these were Deva Radiyars, or servants of the temple of the gods. And from what I have read, these women were probably also paid, because they had the amount, because you find various inscriptions where these women have made donations back to the temple, or made some grants of a cow or some lambs to the temple, so which means they had agency. This was one sphere where they were. And one particular inscription that I really I mean that I found very interesting was Rajadi Raja Chola had at some point in time was forced to sell some land. I think maybe
Mm,
he needed some money for a war, for a campaign, military campaign, or something like that. But what is interesting is he sold it to a lady whose name was Ariyambai, I think, wife of some Parama Bhatta. I forget the name now, but but the inscription clearly says that this lady bought that land and then converted it into some kind of mutt. So which means and she handled the entire thing with the king, which just shows her place. And she's just a common ordinary woman, so it's not like she's the wife of another king or anything like that. She was an ordinary lady who kind of dabbled in this particular transaction with the king, which I think is very interesting that women had that much of they were so empowered that they had the choice, they could do what they wanted to. Then, as I mentioned before, the warriors, you had women in the navy. They were trained warriors, they were bodyguards. There was an entire this thing, and all these women were there, trained, well trained, along with the men, the male warriors of the time. So they were all in equal standing. So I think the entire background as such is, the ecosystem is such that these men had not seen anything different. So they didn't need a particular incident in their life to bring out the feminist in them. That was how their entire worldview was.
True. And wonderfully
I
put,
just
Harini.
I
So just loved what you said.
I just want to add a word here, since you were mentioning the Chola princess, Raja Raja Chola's sister Kundavai. If you see the temple inscriptions, she was a supremely powerful. Even though she was the sister, she wasn't the wife, but she was a supremely powerful entity in his kingdom. And there are several temple inscriptions talking about her donations, her offerings. And the interesting thing here is that if you look at ancient India, Kundavai is one example. The other example is, of course, Harshavardhana's sister
Hmm.
and Rajashri. So you have these figures. Rajashri was, of course, a widow. Kundavai's husband was also there, but rather than Kundavai's husband, it is she herself, and she again, as Harini was mentioning, she was a very powerful, strong woman. She had business interests and so on. So she was clearly like a parallel power center. And Raja Raja Chola had no problems with that. He was okay with it. And you see the same thing in Harshavardhana's case as well. So you have a tradition in ancient India of kings being cool with women of agency,
Or
women
for that
being
matter, I mean, another example that just came to my mind was Shantala of the Hoysala dynasty.
yes, yes,
Was, I mean, she built the entire Belur Halibid, the
yeah,
temples there
yeah,
when Biti Deva was out at war. So that just shows that he had the confidence in leaving the kingdom to his favorite queen.
yeah, absolutely,
Absolutely. Sai, would you please like to add?
Yes, that was again beautiful
Yeah.
examples by both Nandini and Harini. Actually, I'm a big fan of the Chola period, also Harini. So I keep reading about these awesome women. I think after Veda Vyasa's women, I think my favorite are Kalki Krishnamurti's women, because each of those women are so unapologetically unique. Again, they're just unabashedly ambitious, and just they
Actually,
just carve their own trajectories so actively, not passively. They
true.
do
I
it
mean,
so
my
actively.
introduction to the Chola period, unfortunately or fortunately, has been through Kalki's novels. So, because I'm not a historian, right? So, maximum
Yeah.
I've gained from reading Ponniyin Selvan and
Hmm. Yeah, of
Shivakamin's.
I
course.
think none of us are, Harini, so we don't need to, be apologetic about it because we are using our common sense and that has its own importance.
yeah,
Yes. So yes, coming to the question, Coral, I'd like to look at it as in a slightly different manner, because the situation around Narakasura Vadha was, it was not normal. It was something where things were going slightly out of hand, and only Krishna realized it. So I keep thinking, if he had not married those women, what would have happened is that the world would still have extolled him as a destroyer of evil or anything, a lot of things like that. But the women would have had nowhere to go, and God knows what would have befallen them. Would they kill themselves, or would they just fade away to oblivion, not lead very respectable lives? Or there it's so uncertainty. And l- imagine the world with so many women with that angst and that sense of injustice within them,
Hmm.
while the rest of the world, it just carries out like nothing has happened, right? And Krishna had that sensitivity to think beyond what normal world would think. So we can only gauge the difference that it
Yeah.
made to those women and probably their children, and the generations of, whatever, whoever, inherited that, the whole family legacy. But had he not married, I mean, it wouldn't have made a difference to others, right? Other
Hmm.
kingdoms or anything like that, it wouldn't have made. But he was unique in being sensitive to the fact that it is injustice, and problem is not solved by just killing a monster. We have to right all the wrongs done by him. Unless that is done, the whole cycle of the war of good over evil is not complete. So the war is only complete when those injustices are corrected, not with just the
Corrected and not
military.
repeated.
Yeah, it's not with just the military victory. Every
Yeah.
generally stories end with that military victory, with a nice ode to the warrior whoever won the war. But this addendum is something which makes him so unique, where he was not, from the world order, he was not obliged to do that, but he felt obliged from within. His inspiration came from within, not from outside. So that is something which makes the whole episode very special to me personally.
Lovely. Once again, a very, very wonderful thing that you have uh, put the pin on. Uh, Something that again I would like to draw attention is Pandu's story, which I was talking about telling. The background story of Pandu, the way he was born, to the way we all know that Ambika and Ambalika uh, could not have children from their husband, and so Vyasa was called to impregnate them, right? And one of them closed their eyes, the other one turned pale, because of which Dhritarashtra was born, and after that, Pandu. And then we know that Pandu is pale and weak and important. Now, when we look behind into this, there are lots of stories of Pandu's bravery as well. He would go and win wars and come back. So I tried to, investigate this very thing that Pandu was born pale and weak and then important. I mean, how can an important man uh, feel the kind of lust for Madri? With Kunti, he didn't, it's okay. But then, why is this difference between the two wives? He definitely had a differential treatment. It was different for Madri and different for Kunti. So it was not that he didn't have it within himself. It was just that for Kunti it didn't come up, which is absolutely fine. But then when I tried to delve a little deeper, what I figured was that in a Pandu, a child who was born from a mother who was scared at the time of conceptualization, obviously grew up with that knowing that how he was born and the fact that the father was forced on the mother, right? That person will definitely grow up with some kind of underconfidence which wouldn't allow him to face the world with equal degree of confidence, or he will not or and he will uh, have certain issues for women and against men, which might make him very, very shaken when it comes to performing any kind of function where a male and a female are equally involved. And that is where it just came to me that, oh my God, this impotency that we are talking about could be a very strong case of mental health which this person is facing, because he grew up under the influence, knowing and probably even being ridiculed about the fact that he is born under such conditions. And then history, and call it destiny, brings him to the kind of situation where his children are also born in the same way. But then we don't find his children having any of such issues. One, because obviously they are born from the devas and the mother was not scared. And secondly, what I feel is that Pandu was a very strong backbone to his children, whoever they were born from. But he didn't allow them to think about their dual parenthood or dual fatherhood as something to be ashamed of. He made them proud of whatever their mother had done, whoever their father was, be it the Deva or be it the uh, man on earth. That I find very, very fascinating about Pandu, which obviously most of the stories in mythology are not told to us in light of these incidents. And it's very, very interesting to, I mean, find out the spark which just brings you to those points where you identify these kind of things. Anything else that you would like to add before I go to the audience question? Because all that I had have already been answered and discussed. So should I bring up the audience question? There
I
are
think we
two.
can take some audience questions.
Yeah, there are two questions that I'll take. There's a question by Arun G. Is it appropriate to use modern concept to areas that relegate to times that are aligned to these concepts? Any of you can take. Please go ahead and share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I actually mentioned this in my opening comments, that a concept like feminism is something that is modern, and we are trying to superimpose it on an age which may not have understood. But it is that the tradition of having men who were confident enough in their skin to allow the women around him, or to encourage the women around him rather, to have control over their lives, is not a modern thing. At least, certainly not a modern thing in the Indian tradition. It is not. It is something that goes back uh, to ancient India. And the examples that we have discussed so far, Sai, Koral, Harini, and I have given enough examples to establish the fact that uh, this whole concept of a man who and a woman who shared a relationship of equality, and an equality that extends not only to say economic power or social power, but also political power. That is not a concept that is alien to the Indian tradition at all.
Very true. Sai and Harini, would you like to add something? Or should I move to the next question? Great. So I will move to the next question, which has also been discussed briefly. Aninda Sengupta asks if it is very interesting conversation indeed. Thank you, Aninda. Not much people are conscious about the feminist men in ancient India, but don't you think that in our mythologies, importance is given more on the female characters than on the male characters than on the female characters? Fabulous question. Any of you?
Yeah. So, if I can take that, the unabridged texts, right? Be it the Puranas or the Mahabharata or Ramayana, gave a lot of space to women. So it's the problem is with the abridged retellings, because a lot of abridged retellings or even the derived works, they tend, especially that which are written in the modern, when I say modern, the last 50, 60 last century, the whole century of retellings, they were centered around wars mostly. So once it becomes about a war, then it becomes that, whoever who fought there and who won. So that somehow reduces the space given to the feminine, right? So that way, it is the retellings which did injustice to the feminine and not the root texts. So once you start reading the unabridged Mahabharata, you will discover uh, awesome women, and they are not even the Kuru women that, the Kuru family is in the spotlight, so naturally Kuru women are going to get a lot of spotlight, but the passing references to women like Chandili, like Madhavi, like Shakuntala, Savitri, each of them have such compelling trajectories, right? And so that one who reads the Mahabharata in full cannot say that our mythology is male centric, but retellings, a lot of retellings
Yes.
are male centric, which is why I think, I felt it.
Actually, Sai, not just the properly documented retellings. Most of the people don't read the Ramayana and Mahabharata properly. They hear it from their grandparents or they read the comic books, right? So there, there obviously the way the stories are told are from the patriarchy of another generation. So they
Yes.
tell the stories very much from the men's perspective because that is where uh, they want to bring up the bows that were used and the arrows that were shot. But there were the Mahabharata and the Ramayana carry stories about wars which were not about killing and which were not about battlefield. There are wars which are beyond beyond the the battlefields, and women stand for those, which happens on everyday life basis. Right now something must be happening at your own home where a woman is fighting a war, and the same you are doing, but your war which doesn't involve using a revolver and killing someone will not be called a popular war, because most of the
Yes.
times you will not talk about it because you will feel men
True,
don't
true.
cry. Women don't talk about it because we are culturally designed in a way that we pull things behind and think बात बातों से बात बढ़ेगा, right? So all these politics become a thread and becomes a big mala which are poured into my neck and everybody else's neck and even the male neck. And so we feel that it is the men's stories that are highlighted. No, it is the story, the way the stories are told to you, and that makes you feel that the men have received more spotlight than the women. They
Yeah.
haven't. There is more question coming. There is one from Harini Srinivasan. Since we are discussing history, do we have any instances of a woman choosing her individual desires over her dharma? Oh, Ahalya, Kunti, Draupadi, Mandodari, Tara, मैं और कुछ नहीं बोल रही. Sai, Nandini, Harini, please go ahead if you have to add.
Yeah, you've been giving so many examples. Come on, Koral. This is your this is your question. You should answer it.
The entire Panchakanya, which is translated as five virgins, and I mean, Kanya has been translated into virgin, talks about virginity not as a physical construct but as a spiritual construct. And from there, if you see Panchkanya, and there is a sloka which says that agar aap Panchkanya ka naam loge, to all your sins will be dispelled. And the Panchkanya gives you all the instances, it shows you every kind of politics that has happened around women and how to come out of those without creating the kind of disruption that is destructive, but putting things together, threading things together in a way where you win along with the world. So these are five women. Ahalya Kunti, we all know that what are the instances where women have chosen her individual desires over dharma. Uh, Satyavati, we have named. I won't call it against her dharma, but she had chosen her own dharma and she stuck to her dharma. Ganga did. There are many such. Radha did. There are many such. Anybody wants to add anything?
Yeah.
Well,
Actually,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sure. Sorry.
No, go
So
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So the definition of dharma is very dynamic, Dharini. So there is no one definition of dharma where you say this is, when I do this, this is dharma. When I don't do this, that's adharma. It's not that way. But once I make a choice, how I stand by the choice makes that that actually judges me by my dharma. Is about making the choice and standing by that choice. And these women that Koral mentioned, and the many more women that exist in our past, they have made the choice, and they have taken either whatever the glory or the Brent, they have just taken it on their chin. So that's what makes them strong and inspiring. Even Kaikeyi, for that for that
Yes.
instance, right?
Actually, Sai, just take 1 minute and elaborate on Kaikeyi, because many don't know who Kaikeyi actually is.
Oh.
Yeah, really. They know that she was the conspirator, but they don't know who she was.
So
They
yes,
know that she
she's
was
the
Rama's stepmother. Beyond that, they don't know.
so she is the princess of Kekaya, who was the wife of Dashratha, and Ramayana describes her to be the favorite wife of Dashratha, and she is known to have loved Rama a lot. More than her own son, she's known to have loved Rama. She's known to have taught Rama basic archery, basic warrior skills before they were sent to the ashrama of
Gurukul.
Vasishta. So she loved Rama a lot, and maybe there was that moment of you know correction what she felt, when Manthara comes and tells her that the king did not consult you before he just announced. So what does that mean? You are kind of going off his important priority list, and that moment of insecurity would have made her choose to uh, and she chose what was due to her. It was not like, she didn't ask out of her turn, right? It was, she had not asked for those boons all this time. She was so happy, fulfilling her roles in so many ways. She didn't find the need to ask for any boon with from Dasharatha, and this is one juncture where she called for what was due to her. Maybe the only mistake she made, which I feel, is that she underestimated Bharata, her own son. She's the one who she's the one who brought up Bharata, and she is the one who would have taught him, to respect his brothers and to love his brothers. The Bharata's morality is not beyond Kaikeyi. That's the reason for Bharata's morality is Kaikeyi. So that is
Sai,
the
I also feel that Kaikeyi, being the warrior princess that she was a Dashrath's charioteer. She had led him in war. So I wouldn't blame Kaikeyi if at that point of time, when Rama was being coronated, if she felt that Rama was, in terms of experience and in terms of his worldview, if he was still not eligible to rise up the throne, and he needed more in his CV, if I may use that word. Uh, because she never said that make Bharat the king. She said send him to Banvas and make him the king, make Bharat the king in the interim, which is something that we so conveniently dump, you know. So anyway, thank you guys for this brilliant session. We are talking about dharma, and we have more dharma beyond this period of time when we are engaged into this really, really interesting session. And I feel truly sad that we are ending this session, because this session could be endless, and this session would have much more to add than how much we have poured in. Thank you, Harini, Nandini, and Sai, for joining us this evening. Thank you, audience, for your questions. And just to remind again that submissions and registrations are open for the Writing Program Season 5 in association with Rupa Publications. Good night. Have a great time. Stay safe and be happy as much as you can. Thank you so much, all of you.
thank you for